Theme 69: Society and Culture: Stereotypes and Emblems of the English-speaking countries. Music in the English language as a means of cultural influence. Index: 1. Introduction. 2. Relation with other themes. 3. Current legislation. 4. The British. 5. The Americans. 6. Canada, Australia, and South Africa. 7. Music as a cultural influence on society. 8. The use of songs in the language classroom. 9. Conclusion applicable to language teaching. 10. Relevant bibliography. 1. Introduction. The theme I have chosen to write about is number 69, which deals with the stereotypes and emblems of the English-speaking countries, as well as the role of music in the English language as a means of cultural influence. In the first place, I will briefly talk about the history of Britain. I will then go on to talk about the main stereotypes and emblems of the different countries making up the British Isles, as well as the ones from the United States, Canada, Australia, and South Africa. After this, I will talk about the role of music both in society and in the language classroom. I will finish with a conclusion related to some thoughts on how best to approach the teaching and learning of all these aspects in our secondary school classes. 2. Relation with other themes. This theme is directly related to other themes dealing with language and culture, especially theme 66, which talks about the importance of English in the world nowadays. 3. Current legislation. The Modified Organic Law of Education, the LOMLOE, came into force in 2021 and has now been introduced in secondary education. The law deals comprehensively with the most suitable type of methodology to be implemented in our secondary school classes. The official curriculum of the Autonomous Community of Madrid contains detailed information about the introduction of historical and cultural points during the different stages of compulsory secondary education and bachillerato. All of this is established and supported by the Council of Europe in the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. 4. The British. A brief note on history. Although the United Kingdom covers a small area of the Earth's surface, it represents people of many different origins and cultures. In order to understand the differences among all these groups, we will give a brief account of the different people who make up the population of the British Isles. About 2,000 years ago, the British Isles were inhabited by the Celts, who originally came from continental Europe. The Romans invaded the islands in 43 AD and, in calling the country Britannia, gave Britain its name. The Angles and Saxons came from Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands in the 5th century, and England gets its name from this invasion, Angled Land. The Vikings arrived from Denmark and Norway throughout the 9th century, and in 1066 the Normans invaded from France. The English. Traditionally, an Englishman is considered to be reserved, unemotional, polite, traditional, shy of strangers, suspicious of change, conscious of his place in the social order, disliking any show of emotion and lack of control, and fervently believing that the English are superior to any other race on earth. After England became a Protestant country in the 16th century, it became a refuge for other Protestants from Catholic states who were being persecuted for their faith. One of the greatest migrations occurred in the 30s and during the Second World War when thousands of people fled from Nazi persecution in Germany, Austria, and other European states. Many of them stayed and settled in Britain when the war ended. Between 1948 and 1962, many nationals from countries of the old British Empire moved to Britain, as at that time they had complete freedom of entry. Since 1962, immigration was subject to strict control. The new immigrant communities are concentrated in towns and cities like London, Bradford, Leicester, Birmingham, Wolverhampton, or Luton. More recently, following the free circulation of European Union citizens, there has been a huge increase in the number of immigrants looking for work in the United Kingdom. The largest numbers have come from Poland. The Scots. There is still perhaps some difference between the northern and the southern part of Scotland. Due to its geographical situation, the mountainous north is more isolated from the rest of the country and from Europe than the south. In these circumstances, it is easy to try to maintain their separate identity. The Gaelic language, which comes from the ancient language of the Celtic tribes, is still spoken in remote parts. Among the traditions, there is one which has become a stereotype for the rest of the world. It is the belief that the true Scot must wear the national dress, the kilt. Kilts are pleated skirts made of woolen material with a color design called tartan. Most Scots are Scottish lowlanders, and they concentrate in the densely populated towns and cities of the southern Scotland. These urban areas are heavily industrialized, and since the last century there has always been a constant flow of young men from the highlands, mainly based on an agricultural economy and fishing, to the lowland industrial areas. In the last couple of decades, however, the reverse has taken place. There has been a migration of labor to the northeastern coastal areas to well-paid jobs in the North Sea oil industry. The Scots have a reputation for being hard-working, serious-minded, and cautious with money, but this is falling again into generalizations. Since the 60s, there has been considerable Scottish national agitation for a separate parliament or assembly, which would give them a greater say in the planning and running of their own affairs. Very often, a Scotsman can be recognized by his surname, Campbell, Gordon, Stewart, and all those beginning with Mac or MC, which means son of. But probably the most distinctive feature of the Scots is their peculiar style of speech and accent. The Welsh. The Welsh have been united with England since the 1535 Act of Union, but in many ways they try to maintain their separate Celtic heritage. Officially, Welsh, an ancient Celtic language but different to Scottish or Irish Gaelic, has equal status with English in Wales, but in practice it is a minority language. The Welsh National Party, Plaid Cymru, wants more Welsh language and culture in schools, the media, and in public life in general. A referendum held in 1997 gave the Welsh the right to establish their own parliamentary assembly in Cardiff. The Welsh are famous for their love of music and birds in Welsh, the most famous being the National Eisteddfod, which takes place in August and lasts for about a week. The highlight is a competition for the best epic poem about Wales, written and read in Welsh. The winner is crowned Bard. Another passion which they share with the other parts of Britain is rugby. Like in Scotland, the north and the centre of Wales are mainly agricultural, while the south is highly industrialized, with over two-thirds of the population living in this area. Coal mining and steel manufacture are the main economic activities, although both these industries are in serious decline. A Welshman can often be recognized by his name, which might be Jones, Williams, Thomas, Evans, or Lloyd. The Welsh are also identified by the soft singing way in which they speak. The Irish. The Irish, a mainly Celtic people, have maintained their ancient Gaelic language, but English is spoken by everyone. Like the Welsh, they have a rich literary heritage, and writers like Jonathan Swift, Oscar Wilde, George Bernard Shaw, or James Joyce have portrayed their countrymen, avoiding the stereotypes and presenting them as normal people. What most people have in mind when they speak of the Irish are the inhabitants of the southern part of the island, the Republic of Ireland, completely independent from the United Kingdom. Probably the most typical stereotype is that the Irish often tend to be the target of many English jokes, like, "Did you hear the one about the Irishman who..." Although the ginger-haired Guinness drinker could well be another. Stereotypes and emblems of the United Kingdom. The Union Jack, correctly called Union Flag, the flag of the United Kingdom, is probably the most important emblem of the nation. It is made up of three crosses. The upright red cross is the cross of St. George, the patron saint of England. The white diagonal cross is the cross of St. Andrew, the patron saint of Scotland. The red diagonal cross is the cross of St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland. The Church of England, of which the King is the head, plays an important role in the British society. There are, however, many other churches to which people belong, like for instance the Roman Catholic Church, the Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, the Presbyterian Church, and other small groups. The Methodists and the Baptists are particularly strong in Wales. In Scotland, the Presbyterian Church is the established one and is completely separate from the Church of England. The pub or public house is the most popular place for meeting friends and relaxing. Tea at 5 is a stereotype which is essentially true, but for the hour. We can say that the British are constantly drinking tea, and it is such an emblematic habit that it has given its name to the main meal in many households. 5. The Americans. The melting pot. When we talk about the United States as a melting pot, we refer to all those immigrants who have supposedly merged with the Native Americans and ceased to be German, Japanese, Irish, etc. Probably the most important characteristic of the American society is this diversity of people and their different origins. Many descendants of European immigrants have stayed together in groups. There are neighborhoods in large cities which are predominantly Italian or Chinese, and there are large German and Irish communities like Chicago and states like Michigan. The Oriental Americans have proved to be very successful immigrants, although they make up less than 1% of the population. Anglo-Saxon Americans rarely think of themselves as an ethnic group. They comprise about 45% of the population. Many African Americans are tracing their roots back to the African tribes from which their ancestors were torn in the days of slavery, and some of them identify more and more with Africa. Some African American leaders disapprove, reminding them that their culture and language are not African, they are American. Besides, race relations have always been a problem in America. After the Civil War, many thousands emigrated to the North and whole communities of African Americans crowded together into ghettos in cities like New York, Chicago, and Detroit. These ghettos, neglected by the authorities, became slums. Unemployment in the African American ghettos remained consistently higher than in white communities, and this led to drugs and crime. Cities like Atlanta and Los Angeles have elected African American mayors, and the proportion of African Americans in American colleges has increased in the last 20 years. It goes without saying that the election of an African American president, Barack Obama, greatly helped the cause for this group of citizens. New Mexico was colonized by the Spaniards, but at present it is dominated by the Angles, who tend to be better off than the Hispanics. Despite this fact, there has been a successful integration between the different ethnic groups. Many Mexican Americans still speak Spanish as their first language, and their inability to speak good English is a greater handicap to them when they are looking for jobs. Many of them live in poverty, though the average Chicano is better off than the average African American. In the second half of the 20th century, Mexicans began to pour across the border into the USA. At the moment, nobody knows how many illegal Mexican immigrants there are in the States. In Florida, most of the immigrants come from Cuba, and the Puerto Ricans usually pour into New York. The history of the white settlers' treatment of the Native Americans has been one of treachery, broken promises, and great barbarity. Today, many of them live on reservations established by the federal government, and many of these reservations continue to be useless for growing crops or raising cattle. In them, Native Americans are free to govern themselves, to elect their own leaders, preserve their heritage, but many of them do not feel at home in American society. Stereotypes and emblems of the USA. Americans are seen as great enthusiasts and rather sentimental. They feel very proud of their country, and at the same time they can be very self-critical. They are supposed to be hardworking. The culture and the society have influenced these stereotypes, and the American dream is probably the most popular. It is said that the Americans have a passion for grandeur, which is seen in their skyscrapers and bridges. Many people say that the only aim of most Americans is to make money. The USA has one of the highest standards of living in the world, although at present 10% of the population is below what the government considers to be the poverty level. It has been said that the individual American is generous, but that the American nation is hard. One of the most significant emblems of the USA is the 4th of July. It is the most important holiday in the States, for it commemorates the date when the Americans declared their independence. Another national emblem is the American millionaire, the personification of the American dream. However, all these emblems and stereotypes seem more real from outside the States, and they are in fact the necessary elements of the image that the most powerful country in the world must give. 6. Canada, Australia, and South Africa. Canada is a vast and diverse country that is associated with several stereotypes and emblems. One of the most recognizable emblems of Canada is the maple leaf, which is prominently featured on the country's flag and is often used to symbolize Canadian identity. Similarly, the beaver is also widely associated with Canada and is often used to represent the country's industrious nature. Canadians are often stereotyped as polite, friendly, and welcoming people who enjoy outdoor activities such as ice hockey and skiing. The country is also known for its multiculturalism and its commitment to diversity, which is reflected in the mosaic of languages, religions, and cultures that exist within the country. Australia is often associated with a number of stereotypes and emblems that are well known throughout the world. One of the most iconic emblems of Australia is the kangaroo, which is often used to represent the country's unique wildlife. Similarly, the koala is also widely associated with Australia and is often used to promote the country's natural beauty. Another emblem of Australia is the boomerang, which is seen as a symbol of the country's indigenous culture. Additionally, Australians are often stereotyped as laid-back, friendly, and welcoming people who enjoy spending time outdoors and playing sports such as cricket and rugby. Finally, South Africa is a diverse and vibrant country associated with several stereotypes and emblems. The most recognizable emblem of South Africa is the national flower, the protea, which represents the country's beauty and resilience. Another iconic symbol of South Africa is the Big Five, a group of African animals including the lion, elephant, buffalo, leopard, and rhinoceros. These animals are widely regarded as a symbol of South Africa's natural heritage and attract tourists from all over the world. South Africans are often stereotyped as friendly and hospitable, with a rich cultural heritage that includes diverse languages, music, and cuisine. However, it is important to acknowledge that stereotypes can be limiting and should not be used to define an entire nation or culture. 7. Music as a cultural influence on society. The influence of music on society is not a new phenomenon. Medieval lyrics and ballads spread news through the medium of music, but nowadays, thanks to radio and television, videos, the internet, concerts, or the sale of records, the phenomenon is much more widespread. We need to go back to the 1950s to witness the beginning of this musical explosion. The advent of rock and roll had an enormous impact on society, affecting people's lives, their ideology, and even fashion. Young people found that they had something to imitate, and they did so, at times in a most extravagant way. Since then, one trend has followed another. The Teddy Boys dressed like Elvis Presley, the undisputed king of rock and roll. In the 60s and 70s, the mods appeared. They followed groups like The Who or The Small Faces and dressed smartly, with their hair cropped. They took drugs and rode scooters and were always seeking their deadly rivals, the rockers, who rode powerful motorbikes and were heavily into alcohol. Many English coastal resorts witnessed mass battles between mods and rockers during bank holiday weekends. Towards the end of the 60s, a new culture emerged. Music began to include strange sounds and images in an attempt to recreate the psychedelic or dreamlike experience of drugs like LSD. The hippies, as they called themselves, preached a philosophy of peace and love, and many lived in communes. Much of their culture was a protest against the materialism of the era. The next trend to appear was the punks. The meaning of the word punk is immoral or worthless, and many of the punk bands, like the Sex Pistols, certainly lived up to this. They sang about anarchy and destruction and insulted anybody and everybody. Their music was loud, fast, and at times tuneless, but many punk lyrics contain a definite message for society. New wave and acid house music followed in the 80s. Heavy metal music has millions of followers throughout the world, and it seems that the influence of music on society is something that will never die. One has only to look at the vast following that singers or groups like Michael Jackson, Queen, U2, the Rolling Stones, or Bruce Springsteen have had. In the 90s, groups like Oasis or the Spice Girls revolutionized British and world society. There have been so many other trends in music, such as reggae, gospel, hip-hop, country, rap, or heavy rock. 8. The use of songs in the language classroom. Songs are a more than useful medium for the language classroom. Everyone, whether teachers or students, loves working with them. They are enjoyable and motivating for the students and offer excellent opportunities for genuine communication and real speech. They permit the students to apply vocabulary and structures learned in class to real life outside the classroom, and to use language and learn how it is used by native speakers. Songs are a powerful aid for teachers in the process of teaching vocabulary, pronunciation, syntactical patterns, and structures. What is vitally important for the teacher is to choose songs which are useful for some specific point of language learning, instead of using them to finish off a lesson with, quite often, little or no connection with what has preceded. Unfortunately, many teachers seem to run out of imaginative ideas when it comes to the use of music in the classroom, although it is so easy to go beyond the traditional gap-fill exercise with songs. One definite advantage of using songs is that the activity can be adapted for or aimed at different levels of students. Straightforward vocabulary exercises would be suitable for lower intermediate groups, while for more advanced students we can use songs to lead to follow-up activities like role plays or whole class discussions. We all know how much the students' interest in the culture of English-speaking countries can be awakened by means of using authentic material. With songs, we have a veritable wealth of material at our disposal, dealing with a wide range of topics. We must remember that our didactic objectives for using songs in the classroom would be for our students to be presented with real English. Too many slang expressions and grammatical constructions, double negatives, and things like that could well have just the opposite effect. 9. Conclusion applicable to language teaching. To conclude, I would like to highlight the importance of making our students aware that the stereotypes and cliches previously mentioned, in many cases, do not represent the whole of a society or the cultural life of a country. As for the role of the song in the English classroom, we as teachers should make use of all the resources at our disposal, taking advantage of the power that music exerts on our students to help them learn new linguistic structures and, at the same time, enjoy our lesson. 10. Relevant bibliography. The bibliography that I have used for the information of this theme has basically been the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages by the Council of Europe and the Hidden Rules of English Behavior by Kate Fox. I hope you agree with me that my theme has covered all the necessary points and that it has demonstrated the importance of dealing with cultural points as well as with music in the English classroom, using up-to-date methodological principles, something which can only be of benefit to our students.